Hello and welcome to Quit Your Crappy Job, Finding Courage for Positive Change. Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Quit Your Crappy Job podcast. I am one of the co-hosts, Scott Wilson, and I'm here with my other co-host and friend.
Yep, I'm Jeff Hughes. Welcome. It's good to be here. How are you doing, Scott?
I am doing well, Jeff. How about yourself?
I'm doing well too. This is an exciting time. This is our first podcast, as you said, our inaugural podcast. So this is going to be fun. I'm excited to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, me as well. And hopefully it'll be interesting for all of our future listeners as we get this thing started off.
Yeah.
But as we get started, Jeff, I guess we ought to start with who we are and then kind of get into what the podcast is going to be about and talk a little bit what we've learned already as we kind of dissected and have met with some of our guests and have already at this point recorded a couple of episodes. So maybe I'll start and I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Yeah.
So as already mentioned, I am Scott Wilson. The distinctive part of my very common name is that Wilson is spelt with two L's. So the terrible dad joke has been that the reason there are two L's in my last name is because, as Grandpa would say, no one was ever able to beat the L out of us. Which, you hear that as a kid and you're just like, oh no, can't tell your friends this. But that's it. So yeah, two L's in Wilson, two T's in Scott, too, by the way. So I guess I've just doubled up on everything in my life. But
Yes,
I
you
live
are.
in the Jeff. I live, as you know, live in the Atlanta area. I am a technologist. I got into software engineering, software development when I was a teenager. Although, unlike a lot of teens who did this in my era, is that they had access to computers. I did not. I got access to computers as a high school student when this was in the just to state the age, just when the 80s were around. So computers were kind of new. Computer programming at the, shall we say, institutional level was definitely new. And there was a computer programming class I took. Turns out it was a government contractor was the teacher. He wasn't really a real teacher. He just took a semester, 6 months off, wanted to give back to the community and took up this class and happened to pick our high school and taught the software programming class the last half of my freshman year, and I was hooked. And so, anyways, I learned how to code in school, took software programming, whatever I could get throughout high school into my college ranks. I did the same thing. The frustrating thing I will find, just again, dating myself, as you get into the 90s, I quickly started finding out I knew more than my professors did when it came to the computers. My first computer programming class at the college ranks, for example, I was teaching everybody how to compile the code at the lab, and the teacher was busy writing tests that test your knowledge on when Mr. Boole, who created a Boolean value, to go computer programming for a minute, when he was born. And I was like, who cares when he was born? And when was the first ENIACs developed? Again, was this a computer history class or is this a programming class? You know what I'm saying? And yet everyone in her class could not compile their code except for me because I already knew how to program and it came naturally to me. So I was in the lab telling everybody, basically undoing her effort. She didn't know how to do stuff. And that was common. I attended the University of Utah, became frustrated in their computer science program because while I was there, I was also working as a government contractor at that point and was already doing a lot of the things that they were trying to teach. And I was already well beyond what they were teaching. And so I left the University of Utah and went off on my own. There was a kind of I could see a big upswing coming. The beginning of the tech bubble was coming. And I thought I had a better opportunity to take my skill, things I already knew. I was spending my money for professors to tell me stuff I already knew. I just didn't see the value in that. So I left to go do my own business ventures and, made some good money. I started with a friend of mine, a company that wrote some software that solved the Y2K issue, for those of you who remember Y2K. And it solved it for the 386 and 486 computers. So that was kind of a fun project. Moved to the Atlanta area where, again, worked with a few other startups. And then along the themes of this podcast, Jeff, I quit some crappy jobs along the way, migrated myself out of software development or software engineering, and moved myself into uh, sales, or what they called a sales engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Where I told people, I kind of moved into management in my software engineering background, anyways, because as people always told me, I could speak geek, but business too. And
Mm-hmm.
then I found out when I was frustrated at the company I was at a broker dealer, that there's a whole industry where they try to find people like that, and they do well in sales. And so when I was exposed to this, I jumped on it, got a job, and never looked back. And then
Mm-hmm.
that turned into me running a global implementation services team, and then ultimately moving into marketing. So my career path has basically been from writing the code to selling the code to implementing the code to now marketing the code. And at least for now, I'm currently in the software marketing or product marketing ranks, and we'll see where that goes. So that's a little bit about me. One last thing I'd say before turning over to you, Jeff, is I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge college football fan. Love college football. Love pro football too, and love the outdoors. Love camping, hiking, fishing, all of that stuff. Um, love art and loved, of course, to cook, as you know, Jeff. But
Yeah.
Jeff, why don't you tell us about yourself a bit?
Sure. Well, so I was born and raised in San Jose, California, and I'll date myself, but I was there prior to it becoming known as Silicon Valley. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, when I was born, San Jose was mostly orchards, and
Right.
and
It
so
was.
around my house where I was born, it was mostly orchards, and that quickly changed. There was a small startup company by the name of Apple that started over in Cupertino, California, which was,
Yep.
I would say, it was probably 10 minutes from where I lived. And so my first exposure to technology and computers was a from a person that I got to know through swimming on a swim team of all things, and he was the fifth person on at Apple, and
Hmm.
he actually wrote the original machine language for the Apple microprocessor for the Apple ones and Apple twos. So I'm really
Wow.
dating myself. Um, but he loaned me a computer and he said, "Hey, do you want to borrow a computer?" And I was like, "What is that? I have no idea what this even is." He goes, "It's the coolest thing. It's a computer for your home." And he said, "It's an Apple II, and I will loan this to you. You just have to come up with a monitor." He said, "Do you have an old black and white TV?" And I said, "Yeah, I have an old small black and white TV." And so I put that on top of the Apple II, and that was my monitor. And the only thing that you could run on the computer at the time was a game of Pong. So, the game that would
Yep.
bounce the ball back and forth, and you'd try try to
Yeah.
move the paddles or whatever. Anyway, that was my first exposure to computers. And like you say, that was my experience, and I was hooked. And by the time I got to high school, which was a few years later, not too long, but a couple years later, I was in high school. They opened up a computer lab. And since we were so close to Apple at the time, it was staffed with mostly Apple II computers. So it takes you back many years. Some in our audience will know what those computers are, and others will be like, "Well, I have no idea what that is. All I know is a
Right.
MacBook Air and
My
all the
phone,
new stuff." Yeah,
the
or my
smartphone.
phone.
That's all they know, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that was my interest in it, and so I had an interest in learning how to program, and I started down that path. And in college, I started down the computer science path, and then decided, marketing is really interesting too. I want to learn how to market these products, and so although I took many classes in computer science and can do some programming, I ended up kind of leaning towards the marketing. And so I guess fast forward over 30 years, I have been involved in marketing at various companies to some degree or another. One last fun fact: when I was introduced to the Apple II, I went over to this individual's house, and he was showing me. He says, "I've got a prototype of a computer here, and I'll show it to you, but you have to promise you won't tell anybody that you've seen this." And I'm like, "Okay, I won't. I won't tell anybody." And it was the Lisa. Do you remember the Lisa?
I
Uh,
don't
you
actually.
don't. Okay.
I don't.
Some of our viewers will know what the Lisa was, but the Lisa was, at the time, it was similar to a Mac, but it was wider and bigger and so on, and it was the prototype of the next computer that Apple was getting ready to release. And so it was underneath a sheet in one of the bedrooms of this guy's house, and he lifts it up and he's like, there it is, there's the Lisa. And of course, if you go back and look at the history of the Lisa, it was an enormous flop. It was
Right.
at the
That's
time, it was a $10,000 home computer. I mean, it was so far out of the market
so
that,
far out of reach.
yeah, so few people could actually afford it.
But you
And
got to
so
see this.
it was, huh?
You got to see this. You
Yes,
got to
I got
see
to
the
see it.
because
And
I
not only that,
remember. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say not only that, but when I was over to this guy's house, and I don't say his name because I don't know if he wants me using his name, but
Right.
he there was a knock at the door, and so he answered, and it was none other than Steve Wozniak,
No
the
way.
founder, the co-founder, of course,
Right.
of
Of Apple.
Apple.
Yep.
And there he was in his Hawaiian shirt. You know, he typically wears these very colorful Hawaiian shirts. And so I got to meet Steve Wozniak, and he
Wow.
came in and was talking about the Lisa and all these things. And I just thought I was among royalty. So that's how my career got launched in technology.
That's
I've
pretty
moved
cool.
around, and now I'm based in the Dallas, Texas area. So that's where I've settled down. I haven't been in San Jose haven't lived in Silicon Valley for quite a few years. So
Now, Jeff, some of what you were saying actually was reminding me. I remember watching a documentary. Of course, I read the book about Steve Jobs, which is a good book.
mhm.
And so this is
Yeah.
reminding me of something I'd seen or read in the book or watching the documentary. If I'm not mistaken, the Lisa came out after Jobs had left Apple. Isn't that correct? I thought it had kind of flopped and things started not going well, which is why they wanted to bring him back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd have to go back and look at the history of it. I think you might be right. He may have still been there. It was prior to the Mac, because Jobs that came
Yep.
back and introduced the Mac.
The
I
Mac.
would say
Exactly.
the Lisa looked like a Mac, but it was much bigger and wider. If you Google Apple Lisa computer, you can see a picture of this big clunky looking computer that was $10,000, and it was just, you know it didn't go anywhere. But you're right. It may have been before Jobs came back to Apple after leaving, and introducing the Mac. Yeah, I can't remember the timing on that.
I was just trying to Google it right now. So the Lisa project started in '78, involved
Hmm.
September '89. Steve Jobs was forced out of the Lisa project.
Okay. Okay.
That's what it was. I knew there was something like that. But anyways, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool, man. You got to meet Wozniak
Yeah.
and folks.
He was a character. He Everything you've heard about him, the nicest guy you could ever meet. I mean, just incredibly nice. He had, by the way, he had just spent $50 million putting on the US Festival. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
the US
No.
Festival. What he was trying to do, he was trying to replicate Woodstock in New York. So, what do you do when you have tons of cash? You try to replicate concerts, I guess. So he
I
was trying to
guess.
replicate Woodstock in New York, but do it in California. And I think he had dumped $50 million into it. He did not get his money back. I mean, they
No.
had the concert, and I guess it was a success to some degree. They had all these bands come and play and
Right,
everything,
right.
but I know he didn't make his money. But when I met him, it was literally like a couple of months after he had done the US Festival. So
Oh wow.
uh, I was thinking, man, I should ask him, how did that pan out? But
So do you ever look back and think, oh, I should have started if I joined Apple back then, since I had the in, what might have been? Have you ever
oh, dude, I kick
is that a sore
myself.
subject?
Oh man. I worked summer job. I worked a summer job there,
Mm,
and they were fairly picky about who they hired. But I did work summer jobs in high school. Worked there. I worked at Intel and a few other places. Um, but honestly, I guess I missed the vision there, and so I went on and pursued my education and other activities in my life, and didn't realize at the time how big Apple would become. I mean, it was successful, and you just thought, okay, it's a personal computer company, and they make nice products and so on.
right.
But I think their technology now is probably the best technology there is in the world. You look at what they have produced with the iPhone and the capabilities and the Apple Watch and everything, and they have become something that maybe only Steve Jobs could imagine. I certainly did not have that capability to imagine that. I just thought, wow, it's crazy
And
how,
right now, they're definitely, I think, at the top when it comes to personal privacy, security, those type of things.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that's pretty amazing, Jeff.
So, fun story.
Yeah.
That's really what launched my interest in computing and technology. And so, yeah, fast forward 30 years or so, and here we are.
And here we are. Exactly. So, I guess where we've both kind of caught up with our backgrounds, Jeff, is that we both were in marketing where we ended up meeting at a company
Hmm.
and worked together on, some on a product line. And then, you know, shall we say the things kind of went sideways. That's kind of the name of the podcast, right? Quit your crappy job. The job, I think, kind of became crappy for both of us.
Yeah.
And, you and I were on the same team. I ran the team. And I remember
Hmm.
one of the shocking things that had happened is that my whole team got divested or sold off. It was like an NFL situation. They
Yeah.
sold the team to another company, and I remained at the parent company.
Hmm.
And, you know, the company was interested in giving me some other responsibilities, but at that point, for me, it just kind of lost its charm. But as we were going through this, Jeff, you and I were working together, right? And just before the split up, the divestiture of you and the rest of my team, we'd had lots of conversations. And at some point, I know I've said this a lot, but I remember the conversation very well because I remember you had told, one of your opening lines when you'd called me. It goes, "Man, you." It was like, I think it was on a Monday. In fact, you
Yeah.
said, "Scott,
Yeah. It
you had
was.
inspired me, and I bought this domain. Quit your crappy job." And I remember
Yeah.
thinking,
Right.
I don't remember what conversation we would have had that would have inspired you to do that. But boy, man, you really piqued my interest. I remember all the alarm bells or whatever good ones going off in my head, like,
Yeah.
quit your crappy job. What did you do, Jeff? Remember, I was asking all these questions. What's happening? What are you thinking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was sitting there at work one day, and I just thought, especially during COVID and pandemic and so on,
Yeah,
so many people have quit their job or their crappy job. They just, and I was curious. It's just like, how do these people, how do they just walk away, and quit? They either must have a lot of money saved up, or I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, but I was intrigued by it. And I just thought, you know what? It would be really interesting to hear the stories of different people and how they quit their job or their crappy job, what they went to, and how that whole process evolved. And so when I called you on a Monday, I was thinking, maybe there's some opportunity here to do a podcast have people tell their stories. And I know you were intrigued by it and you ran with it and you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. And then you added the tagline, finding courage for positive change. And I was like, that's perfect. That really ties this together. How do people find the courage to make a positive change in their lives? And so that's what we're going to talk about in many of the stories is how did they prepare to quit their crappy job? Why did they quit? Where did they go? How did they have the courage to actually do that? And
Right.
and I think that's going to be helpful for our audience, for our listeners.
Exactly. And Jeff, as we discussed, maybe I mean the big stories and the more extreme stories, I guess, would be people actually quit their job. But as you and
Yeah.
I discussed with that subtitle, right, finding courage for positive change, maybe that's too big of a step for many of the people listening to this
Hmm.
podcast. Maybe it's taking a smaller step, switching departments,
Hmm.
asking for a raise. Um, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Small,
Making their life better somehow.
right.
Yep.
Taking a bad situation and improving it just a bit. Sometimes your crappy job quits you. We'll have some guests on
Hmm.
to talk about that as
Yeah.
well. And so having those preparatory, the courage to make some of those preparatory steps or the discipline or the sacrifice mindset to do the things that will prepare you for that inevitability.
Hmm.
Right? No, there was a great book came out in 1994. I should say booklet, and I think it was part of a whole series. For
Hmm.
those watching, I'll hold it up so you can see it on the screen. It's a little booklet. You can find it on the internet. You can buy it still today, but it's by Pritchett and Associates, and the booklet is called "The Employee Handbook of New Work Habits for a Radically Changing World." And this little booklet, it's like 50 pages. It goes through all the kind of things at that time in '94 that were going on with the average worker. And one of the things that they had mentioned, Jeff, is that the average college graduate at that time was going to have 5 separate careers, not jobs, but careers. And so you can imagine there being
Hmm.
multiple changes in that. So as we started doing this podcast, I started thinking, especially with the subtitle, kind of bringing it back in.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, well, 5 separate careers, then finding courage, you need courage in the modern day and age because whether you seek to make some changes, big ones or small ones, change is going to be forced upon you according to the statistics, right?
Hmm.
And so just having the courage to figure out some of these things or prepare for that inevitability. And I think a lot of us don't like change. The data is really good. Change is very stressful. And so
Yeah.
I think with the data I learned from this booklet from Pritchard and Associates to bury your head in the sand, I think in the end can just add more stress as opposed to being a little more proactive and going, no, I'm probably going to switch this career, whatever this career is, to something else,
Hmm.
whether by my
Hmm.
own choice or the choice of my employer. Right. And you and I, when we started working on this because of the changes forced upon us
Yeah.
at our
Right.
job. We didn't
Right.
decide to make
Yeah.
those changes, right?
Yeah. I'm always impressed, or I don't know if it's impressed or amazed when I would come across a coworker that had been employed at the same company for like 20 years. And I'm just like, wow, you are a rare, rare bird. You know,
Right.
how have you lasted this long at a company? I mean, because like
Right.
you said, the odds of staying employed, especially in tech, the odds of staying employed at a company for more than 5 years is unlikely. It's limited.
Right.
You may find another opportunity, or like you said, the job may quit you, and that's so prevalent, especially in high tech. And so when I come across people that have worked for the same company for 20, 25 years, I'm just like, how can that be? That's
Right.
that's just amazing.
I'm the
You know,
same way.
how many layoffs have they avoided or averted?
Right.
And how is that possible? But yeah, there's a
But it
few
happens
survivors, I guess.
Exactly. And it happens at the blue collar level too. So as a child, I remember my dad he was a blue collar worker and he got laid off lots of times. And a lot of times, because
Hmm.
you know how it works, seniority is a big deal in the blue collar world. Well, you get
Yeah.
new hired during the recession of the 70s, low man on the totem pole. Well, you've only been here 6 months. You've been here 1 year, 2 years, whatever. You're the first to go.
Yeah.
And so I remember um, those experiences as a child. And
Yeah. I do
so
too.
when you meet people like you just said, it's really to me mind boggling. Wait, you've been at this place for 20 years?
Hmm.
But statistically speaking, that is remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not
And
the norm, though, from what
no,
everything
and
everybody's saying.
yeah, and I mean nowadays it may hamper your career if you've been at a place that long. The recruiter or the hiring manager might say, "Well, why have you been there so long?"
Right,
It almost seems to connote that you didn't do a whole lot or you were not um, very aggressive because you've been there so long. So I think in some cases, if you're interviewing for another position, either you've chosen to leave or you got laid off. That may be a difficult situation for some people. At least they have to explain it. Why they were at that company for so
right.
long. It used to be a badge of honor. My dad was with the
It
company
did.
for 30 years. But now it's like it's not a badge of honor. It's like it's a question mark for a hiring manager. At least it is in tech.
No, I think, yeah. Well, I think it can be that way in a lot of places. So I remember an uncle of mine was pulling me aside because I was thinking about switching. I was at a government contractor and I was thinking about switching. I'd been there 3 years. In that time, I taught myself C++ and was looking to move on to my next job. And he was trying to argue that I shouldn't leave, that if I bounce around too much, um, employers won't like that because his mentality as of the day of you stick around at a company for your whole career
Yeah,
and the company will provide
yeah,
you a
right.
pension. And I said,
Yeah,
well, uncle, I said, I think you and I have a different worldview on this. I said, my view is this is kind of a mercenarial relationship. They're using me for labor and I'm using them for a
yeah,
paycheck. And it works great. But when I
yeah,
find that our interests aren't aligned, I can just go somewhere else. And he was giving me that advice. Well, if you move too soon, that could actually burn you. I said, how many times has the company you're at restructured your pension? And I remember he just got quiet, said, can you really rely on it? And he just took a step back and he was just like, well, I was like, see, I've already accepted the fact that an idea of a pension or
yeah,
something like that it's just not going to happen. I've
yeah.
seen, you've told me all
You're
these
not even
stories of how
getting a
often.
pension.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I was telling him,
yeah. I
I've
mean,
learned to just take care of myself as best I can and not necessarily rely on somebody else to take care of me, right? Because the
yeah.
company's
I
interests are going to change.
I can remember having similar conversations with my parents early on in my career. I'd been at you know some company for I don't know 3 years, and I said, "Yeah, it's time to move on." And they're like, "What? You've only been there 3 years?" And I said, "Well, times are different," and that was 20 years ago, even.
Yeah,
And now it seems like if you're at if you spend 2 years or 2 or 3 years at a company, uh, you have that challenge of having to explain why you haven't moved around more.
yeah.
So
Especially in technology, I still
yeah,
think the
yeah,
tech industry moves very fast. The technology in the
yeah,
IT sector, Jeff, has been more of the extreme of the statistics that Pritchett and company put out in their booklet.
hmm,
Simply because if you think about it, technology every 3 to 5 years, it's actually reinvented itself. There's a
yeah,
new technology, a new
yeah,
platform, new whatever. So this is why I think technology companies look at a can and go, well, if you've stuck here, you've missed getting on to the next wave, and we don't know if your skills are up to date, right? So
yeah,
that was one aspect of the tech industry being so volatile like that. Secondly,
yeah,
the tech industry for the last I think 40 or more years has had a work shortage. And
Hmm.
so it's really an employee's market. And so it's kind of in your best, the best way to get a raise is to leave your current company and go to another one,
Yeah.
right? Learn what you can from this
Yeah.
job and then go quit and leave somewhere else. And I guess through our
Right.
podcast, we can talk to why that is and why organizations do that, why you can typically get a better salary by leaving to get another job as opposed to asking
Yeah.
your boss for a raise. But yeah, the tech industry has those two things going for it. The rate of change and the work shortage, I think, really
Hmm.
hastens the
Yeah, and
turnover.
the work shortage is even more acute now. I mean,
Right.
it's always been kind of acute during my career. There were a few times where we were in a recession kind of thing, and it was like, okay, the tech companies weren't hiring as significantly. Obviously, right now, I mean, things are just booming, and there's more jobs than there are people. And so, if you have the right skills that they're looking for, you can find employment quite easily. So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
hey, maybe we ought to talk a little bit about some of the guests that we have coming up on these podcasts, and
Yeah, for sure.
share with our listeners what we have in store.
Yeah. So, along the lines of what we've kind of talked about, just leading in a little bit of having, I talked about how my dad had been laid off and multiple times. We were talking about the job turnover. Um,
Hmm.
Kind of lead into the idea, what if your crappy job quits on you? One of the folks we're going to talk to is an ex NFL player right out of the gate here.
Hmm.
And yeah, at some point his job wasn't as fun as it once had, and it kind of
Yeah,
quit on him, or his body just
his
wasn't
his his knees quit on him.
exactly. And suddenly, but this is a big life change. No, your
Yeah.
whole life is building, trying to get to this point. You're at the point, and then this change is now suddenly thrust upon you.
Hmm.
And so, how do you have the discipline beforehand to anticipate these kind of changes, like we were talking about, as
Yeah.
well as the courage to go after a whole new career? And so, I think
Yeah.
there's some lessons we can learn um, from that guest as far as that. And I just to set the record here, I don't want anyone thinking, oh, NFL player, then that probably means he made all this money. Only a few NFL players hit what is called hit the lottery.
Yeah.
Everyone else is kind of playing at that minimum, which nowadays is fairly good. I think it's 750,000, 750,000 or so,
Yeah.
725, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But back when this gentleman played, it was like 200, 225, 250, something like that.
Hmm.
The point is, you play in a league at making that money for just 5 years. Um, that's not enough to retire on. Not when you're like
No.
30,
No.
you know? And
Yeah.
so, anyways, yeah, there's a lot of factors into this. So I
Yeah.
think
I
that'll be
think.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be a fun one to hear his story and getting into the NFL and all that entailed, and then hanging on to paychecks and planning and then having to build a whole new career, a whole new life in
Right.
another state. I think it's going to be fascinating. You don't want to miss that podcast.
For sure. And speaking of changes, we've got an former, shall we say, former
Mhm.
attorney who turns white collar worker who ultimately becomes a CEO. Now, former CEO who's considering
Yeah.
his options going forward. But still, you got someone who had great dreams of becoming the next Perry Mason or Matlock or I don't know, whatever your great trial attorney is, and gets the
Yeah.
dream job only to realize it's not a dream. He hates it.
Uh-huh.
And now what do you do? And sometimes making these
Yeah.
changes are
He
tough.
uh, he's got a lot of great advice and great stories to tell, and just how he had planned for success and then climbed that ladder. And uh, I think he's going to give our audience a lot of good ideas on how to, what I would say, become indispensable at a company to really
Right.
get out there and do things that maybe nobody else wants to do. And he became indispensable and was able to climb the ladder. And, he found fulfillment in some jobs, and then others he ended up quitting on his path. And
Right.
so that one's going to be fascinating. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, exactly. Then we have another guest. Um, she was into marketing like us.
Mm-hmm.
She leaves her crappy job, and her and her husband decide, since we're free, let's go do something crazy. So they downsize, minimalize, move themselves into a trailer, and decide to go tour the country for a year. And she comes back from this experience and deciding, I think I'm going to start my own company. Right? I'm not going to go back for corporate America. I'll start my own company and see where
Mm-hmm.
that goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I find those changes, I mean, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I don't know. I don't know. I've talked to anyone that would just, I mean, the, well, I remember one time, just to put some context to this, I remember one time when my dad lost his job, he came in with all these groceries and he was excited because he just found out he got laid off. Now, as a kid, I was probably like, I think I was 14 or something at the time, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is something to be excited about. And he goes, I hated that job. This is the best news ever.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do for income, but you know what we're going to do tonight? We're making waffles with strawberry and whipped cream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember learning that was kind of sometimes you got to have the right mindset, or maybe you can play a game or try to look at it in a positive way, which my dad was trying to do for the family, right? This was
Mm-hmm.
a positive. There could be a new change. That's to me was neat. But to hear this woman's story of like, yeah, I tell you what, we're just going to minimize, go into a trailer and hit the road. I mean, that's
Yeah.
quite the reset. My dad's reset was waffles. Her reset was traveling the country
Yeah.
in a trailer with her husband, and they still love each other, still married. What I remember bringing up was pretty. She was like, "Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. We still love each other. We're still married."
Yeah.
But so it'll be interesting to hear her transformation. Right? I think
But
there's a lot to be told.
and I think her story gets to the heart of how do you manage change, you
Yeah.
know, and she chose a path to manage it in a very productive way. She chose to decompress for a
Right.
year. I think a lot of insight could probably be gained from that. I mean, if I look back when my dad lost his job, it was very somber. It was very concerning, lots of hand wringing going on. My mom was very concerned, and
What are we going to do?
and that transferred over to us. And so I think when I look
Of
at
course.
change and changing jobs, it's been very hard for me to have, you know, my first thought is not to go make waffles. My first thought is, oh my gosh, my world is caving in.
Right.
So I think it depends on how you approach things and perhaps what you experienced when you grew up. So, but I think her story is going to be excellent because she really has some good ideas on how to address change. How to respond to things that happen to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then we got another guy who was a software sales person
Hmm.
and left that crappy job and decided I'm going to go start a garage door company. And I've always laughed about this because I've always thought with my own marriage, my wife would be like, get me on a computer, Jeff. I'm pretty good. You get me with tools like on a car or something mechanical. And a lot of times I'm like, wait, what in the world? It isn't working quite right. And he mentioned he was kind of a similar that way, right? So I've always imagined,
Yeah.
okay, wife, I got this great idea. This job sucks. I'm out of it. And I'm going to solve this problem by starting a garage door company. And I could just imagine my
Mm.
wife would be like, a garage door company, like with tools. you're you're going to use tools. You're going to start a company, you know?
You you don't even know how a garage door works other than it goes up and down.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? And that's
And,
kind of
and you
his
know what?
story. He talks about that a little bit.
Yeah. You know, Scott, and he quit a high paying crappy job
Right,
to do something else that he wanted to pursue and thought would be more fulfilling and more enjoyable.
right.
So I think his story is fascinating, and
Yep.
he was not an overnight success. It was a
Mm-mm.
bumpy ride, um, and so we will get to hear his story and his journey.
I
Um,
thought the thing that impressed me a bit about his story a bit is that you may sit there and think that you kind of throw yourself out of the fire in the frying pan, but if it's kind of your place and it's kind of aligning with who you are, what you're kind of good at, the
yeah.
funny thing is you're happier.
Hmm.
As he put it, he had this high rise. He was had this high rise apartment in Miami. Um,
Hmm.
by all the little metrics, he should be happy, but he was miserable. He was working 6 or 7 days a week, mostly 7 days a week,
Yeah.
and was miserable. And of course, the personal side of his life fell apart, and that's when he was like, I can't do this again." So during his reboot process, he was like, "I can't do that. That can't be success for me. Right? I got
Yeah.
to do something different." In fact, one of the guests we'll be having too is another person who quit his crappy job. Um, he had an opportunity to let go of some employees, and he decided to take uh, the severance package himself rather than letting somebody else go. I was
Yeah.
still working to get him booked, but he um, he turned around and started his own company, or became a franchisee of a chain rather. And what was interesting about his story, Jeff, is similar, like we're talking about. He was already working these 50, 60 hours in the tech industry and switches it from working 12, 15 hours a day, starting this thing up for the next 2 years. And you're thinking, wait a minute, you're working even harder now than you
Yeah.
were then. And he's like, yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm happier.
Hmm.
I wake up every morning just like, let's go get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the difference is he was doing something he wanted to do, and you know, that's an excellent story too. I think a lot of people are in that situation where they're in a job, they've got bills to pay, they think they're stuck, and can't make a change. So,
Exactly. And we got
it,
others that we're working on
yeah.
getting, right, Jeff? There's a guy who was a medical student, does that from a big, long family they're all world renowned doctors, and decides, like the lawyer, oh man, hell no, this is not for me. Well, what kind of courage does it take to go to a family and say, yeah, I'm not doing this? It must be like,
Yeah.
you must be
Yeah.
out of your mind. What do you mean you're not going to go through with this now that
Yeah.
you graduated? What is that? That doesn't make any sense. Um,
I hope he didn't have a lot of student loan debt.
exactly.
Oh
But
wow.
these kind of transformations, we're hoping as we get these people, they share their story. One of the things I'm hoping our guests get, Jeff, is that really they get that little the tagline, the subtitle,
Hmm.
finding courage for positive change. That there's when you decide, or you're trying to decide to make change, or change is forced upon you, it is not at the end of the day the end of the world. That most people will find something else. In fact, the CEO had mentioned, the former CEO had mentioned in his career, as he's had to let people go, which all of us who've ever had to do this hate. I hate having
Hmm.
had to do that.
Hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
fun. But I thought, had a very profound statement. He says, I found out that it wasn't the end of the world for all of these people. That most all of them found something that they enjoyed doing better, whether it was at another
Hmm.
employer, starting their own
Hmm.
thing, or whatever it was. And that's, I think, the light at the tunnel. When you had already talked about, Jeff, that when your dad had that change forced upon him, there's a lot of hand wringing, very somber. What do we do?
Yeah.
Versus realizing, I'm hoping people get from this podcast, it's okay. It can be stressful a little bit to start with, but it's not the end of the world, and you're going to be okay. You can manage this roller coaster, right? You can do
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and you can go assert yourself into the world and make some changes for yourself, and hopefully be better for it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we're going to uncover some amazing messages that are going to help our listeners, well, inspire them to perhaps make a change. And like you said earlier, maybe that change is not all out leaving their particular employer, but finding a better opportunity
Right.
within the company.
Yeah.
But we're going to examine this from so many different angles and
Yep.
hear people's stories and ask them questions and gain a lot of insights. That's our goal.
And hopefully, my other thought would be, as you all listen to these episodes, that you'll also, maybe the stories will help you think a little bit out of the box too. You'll hear someone go, "Wow, I would never thought of doing X, or would never thought of doing Y," and then maybe that'll spawn an idea for you to make that change. Or again, if change has been forced upon you, you'll have some ideas of what to do or how
Yeah.
to manage it. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
to use my dad's example, you start with just making some waffles, or here in the South, chicken and waffles. I don't know, something to just designate, guys, it's bad, but we're going to look at this as a positive to do
Yeah.
something, right? We don't know yet. And there's so many good stories, right? There are a lot of movies based on this. What was that movie? Joy, I think, had that. And there's lots of others like it, but
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great lesson that your dad taught you all on how to handle change. That's remarkable. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this. And I want to welcome all of our listeners to this journey that we're going to embark on here in the next week.
absolutely. And in the coming weeks, right? So the goal as
Yeah.
we get started is to, at least as we launch and get started, is to launch a new episode every 2 weeks. So be looking for us. If you want to be alerted and know when these episodes are coming, you can sign up at quityourcrappyjob.com. You sign up for a newsletter, you'll be alerted when new episodes drop. Of course, you can go and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's the Android Play Store, Apple Podcasts, what have you. And you can subscribe and, of course,
Mm-hmm.
get the podcast there. We'll be publishing on YouTube as well in those other audio platforms like we already talked about. And then also, you can go and sign up and interact with us online at the quityourcrappyjob.com site. So if you know people who we ought to talk to, or you yourself have a story, right? We are looking for people to come to us and, give us this
Yeah.
content, give us things to look at. We're on Twitter as well. You can find us at Quit Your Crappy Job. And yeah, those are all the places to find us. These will all be listed in the links in everything below, or in the description fields of wherever we're at. So yeah, it's actually the Twitter handle,
Yeah.
just so
All
you know,
right.
is at Quit Crappy Job. I had to shorten it. Forgot about that. At
Okay.
Quit Crappy Job. Twitter only allows so many characters in the Twitter handle. But
Right.
at any rate, I'm excited, Jeff. I hope you all are. I hope you all join us on this journey. And Jeff, I'm very glad to be doing this and doing this journey with you.
Likewise, Scott. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thanks for
Well,
joining us on this.
for sure. I guess until our first episode drops with a guest, I guess we'll see you all in a couple of weeks with our first guest, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. Have a good day.
Thanks, Scott. You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. Listen to us wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Quit Crappy Job. Find us on YouTube at Quit Your Crappy Job. Contact us at quityourcrappyjob@gmail.com. Music is provided by Kelton Levitt. You can reach at kelton.levitt@gmail.com.